I want to start with something that genuinely stopped me mid-scroll, and anyone who's followed this franchise for any real length of time knows that's not an easy thing to do anymore. CBS Sports just dropped their top 10 offseason rankings, a complete league-wide breakdown of every roster move made since February. From the loud free agent splashes everybody talked about to the quiet draft day decisions nobody noticed until now. And sitting right there at number 2, above the New York Jets, above the Los Angeles Rams, above several teams that made far noisier headlines this spring, were the Las Vegas Raiders. Not second in the division, not second in the conference, second in the entire National Football League. I read it once, didn't quite believe it, and read it again, just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting the list. This is a national outlet with zero emotional investment in this franchise, looking purely at the decisions made from February through now, and concluding that this front office actually built something substantial. Once I went through their reasoning line by line, I couldn't find a single part of it I disagreed with. So let's walk through why this happened, because rankings like this don't come from one splashy signing. They come from a sequence of decisions that, laid out next to each other, stop looking like a typical offseason and start looking like an actual philosophy, a real coherent plan. That's something Raiders fans haven't been able to say with a straight face in a very long time. The foundation of this turnaround, the reason this conversation exists at all, is Fernando Mendoza. When this organization identified him as their guy heading into the draft, they didn't just select him and hope the rest sorted itself out. They made a real commitment. They built infrastructure around him before he ever stepped foot in the building as a professional. That, more than any single transaction, is exactly what CBS Sports is reacting to here. Think about what that actually requires from an organizational standpoint. Most teams draft a young quarterback and essentially toss him into the deep end, new system, unfamiliar faces, pressure from the very first snap, with almost nothing structurally in place to support him. It's like the front office does the hard work of finding the talent and then quietly crosses its fingers that everything else falls into place. The Raiders refused to operate that way. They looked at exactly what Mendoza would need, not just to survive his rookie year, but to grow into a legitimate franchise quarterback. And they constructed precisely that environment around him, piece by piece. It started at the very top with the head coaching hire, bringing in Clint Kubiak, a coach whose entire reputation is built around offensive development, wasn't some throwaway decision. That hire was a message, loud and clear, to everyone inside and outside the organization. When a team that just spent its top pick on a rookie passer hands the keys to a coach whose identity is rooted in quarterback development, you understand where the priorities sit. Kubiak isn't here to simply manage a roster through a difficult stretch. He's here to build a system around a specific kind of player, and the Raiders made that choice deliberately. Then came a move that flew under the radar for most casual observers, even though it might be one of the more important decisions of the entire offseason. Tyler Linderbaum. The Raiders paid top-of-market money to secure one of the best centers currently playing professional football. I know that doesn't generate the same reaction as signing a flashy skill player, but think about what it represents. You're investing serious money in the man responsible for snapping the football to your rookie quarterback every single play. You're protecting the most important asset this franchise has acquired in years before that asset has even taken a meaningful NFL snap. That's not panic spending. That's a front office that genuinely understands protection up front and what a young quarterback actually needs to develop. Nobody outside the building was demanding this move. They simply did it because it was the correct football decision, and that distinction matters enormously. And on top of all of that, they brought in Kirk Cousins. I know opinions are split on that one, but look at it from Mendoza's position for a moment. You're a rookie being handed the keys to an entire franchise. The lights are enormous, the expectations are real and immediate, and the learning curve in this league is brutally steep for anyone, let alone a first-year passer. Having a veteran quarterback in that room, a guy who's played over a decade at this level, who's stood in genuinely massive moments, matters far more than most people give it credit for. This was never about competition for the starting job. This is about resources, about having someone in that meeting room who can pull you aside and explain exactly what you're about to face before you face it. The Raiders gave Mendoza that safety net, and then they handed him Ashton Jeanty in the backfield and Brock Bowers at tight end. If you're an opposing defensive coordinator trying to build a game plan against this offense, I genuinely don't know where you'd even begin. That's the complete picture CBS Sports is painting when they slot the Raiders into that number 2 spot. They're not claiming this roster is a guaranteed Super Bowl contender. They're not projecting a specific win total. What they're saying is that out of every team in the league, nobody did a more comprehensive, more thoughtful job of building their roster from the ground up this offseason than the Las Vegas Raiders. And once you examine the full body of work, it becomes incredibly difficult to argue against that conclusion. But this story doesn't stop at the offense, and that's the part I don't want to get buried, because the defensive rebuild this spring was every bit as significant. The Raiders signed cornerback Eric Stokes. They added edge rusher Kwity Paye. And they brought in 2 starting caliber linebackers in Key Walker and Nakobe Dean. These aren't depth signings. These are players who have started real NFL games, who bring genuine professional experience that immediately raises the floor of what this defense can produce. When you're building a roster around a rookie quarterback, one of the most important things you can do is ensure your defense isn't putting that young player in must-score every drive situations weekly. You don't need an elite unit. You need a competent, stable one, capable of handing him a lead to protect, or at minimum keeping the team competitive while he learns the speed of the league. The Raiders didn't just hope that defense would appear, they methodically constructed it. Then in the draft, they found something genuinely valuable, Jermaine El-Wardiri in the 4th round. This is precisely the kind of move that separates sharp front offices from teams that simply react to the board. When you're evaluating a prospect who, when fully healthy, was discussed as one of the better players at his position in this draft class, and you land him in the 4th round purely because durability concerns scared off other teams, that's exactly where smart organizations create value. Every team that watched the tape knew what this player was capable of. The only question mark was health, and the Raiders made a calculated bet that the talent was worth the risk at that price point. That's not gambling, that's calculated chess. Then you stack Hezekiah Maces and Mike Washington Jr. on top of that pick, 2 names that probably don't mean much to the casual fan yet. But based on how CBS Sports framed those selections, these are players carrying real sleeper upside, waiting to be unlocked in the right system. And let's not forget, Max Crosby is still on this roster. I almost have to laugh thinking back on how that situation unfolded, because there were genuine weeks this spring where it felt like the player and the organization were heading in different directions. The trade rumors were constant, and at the end of it all, he's still right there in Las Vegas. CBS Sports essentially treats that as a bonus. Beyond all the additions and structural improvements, this front office also managed to retain one of the most disruptive defensive players in the league. If you're tallying up everything this team brought in and held onto this offseason, Crosby staying might genuinely be the quietest massive win in the whole equation. Now here's where things get a little more layered, because running parallel to all this momentum is a conversation that's been simmering for weeks, centered on the wide receiver position and one specific name: Stefon Diggs. His name has been linked to this organization for a while now. Recently, Adam Schefter was asked point blank whether the Raiders might be in the market for a proven veteran receiver, given how unproven this young group genuinely is. His response was careful but revealing. He said he doesn't sense any real urgency from the Raiders, but he also wouldn't be shocked if something materialized. Then he laid out who's actually available right now, and it's a fascinating collection of names. You've got Diggs, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Brandon Ayuk, and Keenan Allen. That's not a list of replacement-level depth pieces. That's a group of players who, at various points over the last several seasons, were genuinely considered among the best at their position anywhere in football. But here's the part Schefter really emphasized, and I think it's the heart of this story when it comes to that group of names. Nobody around the league is willing to pay them what they're asking for. Teams are looking at the age on these contracts, the mileage, the injury histories, and running the numbers on whether the remaining production justifies that financial commitment. Overwhelmingly, the answer coming back is no. So you end up with a strange standoff, where legitimately talented playmakers sit unsigned simply because the price they're demanding and what teams will offer haven't found common ground. Until one side blinks, this drags on unresolved. Combine that market reality with Schefter's read on how the Raiders are thinking internally, and the Diggs situation becomes pretty clear to me. If this front office isn't feeling urgency, they're not going to manufacture panic just because social media wants a recognizable name added. They didn't rebuild this team through reactionary decisions all off-season. They built it with patience and intention. Breaking the bank for an aging receiver purely because of outside noise doesn't match this organization's pattern all spring. My honest take, even with my pick from that entire list, Diggs wouldn't be the first call I'm making. If there's one name that genuinely makes sense at the right price, it's Deebo Samuel. The sheer versatility changes what an offense can design. Moving him around pre-snap, using him in motion, handing him the ball, throwing it to him from multiple alignments. That flexibility is genuinely valuable for a young quarterback still learning to diagnose defenses. Tyreek Hill would also be fascinating, but personally, I wouldn't go past $15 million guaranteed for either one right now. You don't compromise a long-term structural plan for a short-term splash while developing a franchise quarterback. The math doesn't support it. And this brings me to something I think gets dismissed far too quickly: the actual receiver room already sitting on this roster. I understand the skepticism, and I understand why people see a young, unproven group and instinctively reach for the nearest available veteran as the obvious fix. But let me push back a little, because when I actually watch what this group has shown and consider the system they're stepping into, I see considerably more ceiling than the broader national conversation is currently giving them credit for. Jalen Nailor showed genuine, undeniable playmaking ability last season. He was essentially this offense's third option, and there were real moments where you could clearly see what he's capable of once given a real opportunity. He's not just a developmental project anymore. He has functional, legitimate starting caliber ability at this level. Trey Tucker put together a quietly solid season too. He's not going to wow you with highlight reels, but he's consistently reliable, and reliability matters far more in a young, developing offense than most people want to admit. Then you've got Donnie Thornton and Jack Beck, two young receivers standing right at the doorstep of that classic year two leap so many players at this position experience once the game finally starts to slow down for them mentally. Neither one is a finished, polished product yet, I won't pretend otherwise. But four young receivers carrying legitimate upside, operating inside an offense designed by a head coach whose entire background is offensive development, lining up alongside Brock Bowers, a player defenses have to account for on every single snap. That's a group with a real, credible path toward becoming functional and effective, especially as the season progresses and Mendoza continues settling into the speed of this league. Speaking of Bowers, there's something specific I've noticed in the camp reports coming out of Las Vegas, and it tells you a lot about how this offense is actually being structured behind the scenes. Bowers and Nailor have reportedly been lining up in the exact same spot repeatedly throughout slot receiver drills, rotating through identical assignments from the same alignment depending on personnel groupings and the coverage look they're getting. What that means practically is this: when Bowers lines up in line as a traditional tight end, Nailor becomes the primary slot receiver in that formation. When Bowers shifts outside and operates more like a true wide receiver, he takes over that primary slot role himself, and Nailor adjusts his alignment accordingly. This offense has genuine built-in flexibility at the single most important position grouping on the field, and it flows naturally through the two most talented weapons already sitting on this roster. So when you step back and look at the complete picture, the hierarchy here becomes pretty clear. Brock Bowers is the unquestioned number one weapon in this offense, full stop. Nailor functions as your legitimate true number two option. Tucker fills out a steady, dependable rotational role. And Beck has a genuine, realistic opportunity to develop into a real outside receiver by the time week one of the regular season arrives. That's not a weakness to be patched over with a panic signing. That's a group with real structure, clearly defined roles, and an obvious developmental arc already in motion. It simply requires patience, and patience requires genuine belief, and that belief right now is being backed up by a front office that has fully earned it through everything they did this offseason. That's ultimately the entire story behind this CBS Sports ranking. Not that the Raiders are some finished, polished product. Not that this roster is locked in as a guaranteed Super Bowl contender. But that out of every team in this league, none of them did more to genuinely put their roster in a real position to compete, and more specifically, to actually develop their single most important player than the Las Vegas Raiders managed to do this spring. They hired the right coach for this exact situation. They protected their rookie quarterback before he ever played a meaningful snap. They surrounded him with veterans to learn from and legitimate weapons to work with immediately. They rebuilt a defense that genuinely needed reinforcement. They found real value deep in the draft. And through every decision along the way, they never lost their identity as an organization. They didn't make desperation signings out of fear. They didn't chase empty headlines for attention. They built all of this with genuine intention from start to finish. And Adam Schefter essentially confirming there's no real rush on their end to add a veteran receiver right now. That's not organizational weakness. That's a front office that genuinely trusts the plan they've put in place. The narrative surrounding this franchise has stayed negative for so long that it practically became muscle memory across national football media. Everybody already knew the default take before they even looked closely at the roster, but something clearly shifted this offseason. Enough individual pieces moved in the right direction, quietly enough that it never felt like some forced rebrand, but loudly enough that the people whose entire job is evaluating these decisions for a living genuinely started taking notice. When a major national outlet ranks you at number 2 and the actual reasoning behind it holds up under real scrutiny, that's not some random fluke. That's a genuine signal. The rest of this league might want to start paying very close attention to what's actually happening in Las Vegas right now.